Would you please give a big Brisbane welcome to Glenn Steckling?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to extend my thanks to the organization for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here with you all, to old colleagues and friends that are also here, and to discuss what I consider, at least personally, one of the most dynamic subjects that faces our civilization at this particular time. We live literally in amazing times. The abundance of information is really at unprecedented levels. We are learning more in the last several generations than perhaps for hundreds, if not thousands of years before. And in the last several generations alone, we have made an unending leap into the information arena. Some of the images that you see at the moment that we are putting on the screen come from the Hubble telescope. And if you go to spacetelescope.org, you will find the agency where you can find just a fraction of these images that you see. And the reason that I chose to include this right at the beginning is that sometimes we tend to perhaps lose sight of the incredible intelligence and manifestation of creation that is beyond this planet. And when I, at least, look at some of these images, it is awe-inspiring. Endless galaxies and universes and solar systems and planets, uncountable billions and trillions of them, in a three-dimensional medium that literally surrounds once you go out into space. And so by showing this, I hope to also give that impression of what the possibilities are out there. To give you an example of just what a few of our learned educators feel about this subject, we looked at the quotes by Dr. Gdansky. Highly developed civilizations on planets of the suns in our galaxy should be the rule rather than the exception. Dr. Howard of Harvard University. Intelligent beings abound in the universe, and most of them are far older than we are. Professor Thomas Gold of Cornell. Life on Earth may have started when spacemen landed here billions of years ago. And astronaut and physicist Brian O'Leary. Contacts between extraterrestrials seem to have been going on for decades, but we still do not want to admit it. The interesting thing is, while the debate has raged for many, many years about whether there are aliens or are not, and where they come from and what their purpose is, to some extent, every one of us in this room, we are all aliens, because we have discovered that space is the womb of creation. And in that womb of creation, organic and chemical synthesis takes place constantly. And the amino acids and the RNA and DNA that compose life are constantly interacting. And even our most learned professors agree that this chemical process rains down on the planet by literally tons every day. And this we share in commonality with the rest of the planets and the rest of the creations in space. We come from the like bakery, so to speak, that manifests the materials that evolve into what we are. And, as astronomers say, human beings are the norm and not the exception. So we will find, as Professor Panampura said, who runs the Chemical Laboratory of Maryland, that do not be surprised when you land on a planet somewhere someday that someone just like you walks up to shake your hand. And I find such statements extremely profound. and extremely revealing as well. In essence, we have to be like good detectives. We have to nurture this inquisitive nature that we have within us, to explore, to discover more, to go further than this, to simply be spoon-fed information that is far too easily spun and far too easily controlled. We have to look for ourselves. And then we do this, we will find that we do not take phenomenal leaps of imagination when we are getting from one spot to the next, that we must build a foundation that will allow us to understand how life originates, how space travel is capable of. We are not, when we go into space, when we simply go to the moon, a simple 250,000 miles away, it takes the culmination of all our technology to get there safely. We must understand gravity, the pull of the other celestial body. We must understand trajectory so that when it gets there, we're there, and so on and so forth. And when you go to the moon and you look back at the Earth, what a small little blue orb we're looking at. Now, take the next step to the next planet, in which you go millions of miles away, and you look back to that place that you think that is home, and is no more than a flicker of light in a three-dimensional medium of stars that surround you. This is not for the faint-hearted. It is not for the inexperienced. It takes thousands of years of evolution and of technology to get to the point where you can travel the reaches of space safely. Space contains immense storms, as we would have of monsoons and hurricanes that we're familiar with. We have immense electrical storms, giant gravitational poles. We have plasma fields. Space is an ever-changing ocean, not any different than the ocean not too far from here. And we need to understand that it is more than just the familiarity of terms like warp speed Scotty and away we go, or to the next star and turn left. When you look at pictures as of this, it doesn't work that way. So let us give credit where credit is due. And if we are to acknowledge that we have visitors from other planets, from other worlds, then let us give that credit to the advanced thinking that is required to get here and to visit us. We cannot simply imagine that you can take unending bounds of technological leap and scientific advancement and not also advance yourself socially and in the way of thinking. Everything comes about when we have congruent advancement. So let us think about that for a moment. If we have technologies that are thousands of years ahead of us to simply come here and to interact with us, what type of life are they living? What type of social beings are there? What have they experienced in this vast domain of exploration and experience that we have not? We travel to other countries and we become exposed to different ways of thinking, but yet we are not all that different. It opens our awareness. And this type of travel is the maximizer of awareness opening, because you get to see life and its manifestation in all aspects. Thoughts to think about. But yet there can be no doubt that they have come, and for thousands of years. Show me one historical text or one area of history where we do not have record. We have record in China, ancient China, of aerial hovering devices. We have the biblical times of the flying shield, and the flying scroll, and the wheel within the wheel, and the pillar of fire by day, and the glowing cloud at night. In Alexander's time, when recently we looked at programs where they talk about what we call USOs, or unidentified submerged objects, the fact that these objects come in and out of the water, And during Alexander's time, they witnessed that in the Hindu area of India. And so much so that this curiosity was piqued enough to go out in boats into the water and look down to see where these vessels may be coming from. When we look at our Native American and indigenous peoples, our brothers and sisters from what we call a more natural state, they too have a great deal of history involved, beings that have come to interact with them. And lo and behold, have also brought us a message and have been of benefit to our societies. And this has progressed for every century that we can possibly think about. We're all familiar with the term flying saucer, which really was not coined during the time of Kenneth Arnold, but before, in the late 1890s, where flying saucer was a term that was used in the Texas newspaper to describe these type of vehicles. But what a plethora of information and sightings came about, shall we say, in the last 60, 70 years. Here in Australia, you have uncountable reports, newspaper articles of these type of devices, flying, landing, people standing on the edges waving, Papua New Guinea. So it really is no grand surprise. And during this time, this subject was very real. I am fortunate to have grown up, at least partially, in an era where this topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial visitations was taken extremely seriously, not so much ridiculed and skeptical as we have today, and perhaps rightfully so. But we had devices that were landing. We had retrieval of devices. We had them photographed over every nation's capital that we can imagine, printed in the newspapers, by the hundreds, up to the point of at least 700 a day. And this is based on the Air Force estimate. And the Air Force alone says at least 15 to 18% are unexplainable by their own estimate. So this time, from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, as much as we sometimes don't like to regress, this subject was real. And during this time, the original contactees came about. Because people always ask, well, what do they want? If we take, for example, what we call Fermi's paradox, which was a scientific group of men that were in Los Alamos in 1950, and they were discussing this subject. And they weren't discussing if they were here or when they were here. What they were discussing is why they are here. They already knew that they were been here for a long time, but why are they here? A topic we have tend to digress a little bit from. And so contactees, like for instance George Adamski, which I'm fortunate enough to represent, was able to have interaction with these people from other worlds. And of course many scoff at the idea, well, who comes from another planet or another world that looks like you and I? We somehow have been able to accept that they can look like hideous monsters or bizarre creatures with all type of evil intent. That we readily can associate to. But the fact that somebody that looks like us would come and actually not wish to do us harm, but wish to interact with us, that we find somewhat of a little bit of a stretch. But nonetheless, not everyone thought that was a stretch. And I will give you an example of this. In 1967, my father and mother and another lady by the name of Madeline Rotifer was invited to go to NASA before a panel of 22 scientists. And this was not, as we would call an interview, this was an interaction. And when they came together, they discussed how these craft worked. They already knew. Where they come from, they knew that too. How they looked like, not a problem. What they were interested in above all was how many of these human beings who come from other places are living and interacting amongst us. Now let us contemplate that for a second. In order to walk amongst us and live amongst us and to exchange information back and forth, they cannot look too much different than each one of us that are sitting in this room today. 6 months later, the Pentagon was also interested in the same information. Colonel Freeman. Once again, my parents dutifully walked out with the films and the information and sat there in the Pentagon and interacted with this group of officers, and they knew a great deal. They did not find George Adamski to be a kook, and they certainly knew that he had materials that, unlike anyone else, had gathered, because George shared them with everyone. He did not divide. He did not say that you are the government and you're withholding information, and so you're the naughty people, so we're not going to give you any more. It didn't work that way. If anything, he contacted all governments, all denominations of religion, for which he received the Golden Medal of Honor from Pope John XXIII for, and all military bodies. And he gave them information freely. Where we think that they withhold information from us, well, rightfully so, they do a bit. But on the same token, these are the people who are running the organizations that are responsible for our well-being. And these are the people that need to know the facts as well, because they have their finger on the button, so to speak. So this is the very real time that I was fortunate to grow up. And I can say to you that during the last several years of Adamski's life, the films and the pictures, several which you will see, some of the slides are still photography of some of these crafts, is amazing. And there was an international press conferences in the Mayflower Hotel that my father organized, in which all the names of Huntley and Brinkley and all the journalists, the professional ones who still had a bit of integrity, were all there. And they viewed these films and they were awestruck. But they were well aware that we have visitors from other worlds here. So this is the type of information I try to pull people back towards when I talk to them a little bit. I don't like to give lectures per se, I like to interact with you, because we all have different things, ways of thinking and experiences, and it's very important that we exchange information in a civil manner so that we all can learn. So what we'll do here is I want to show a few slides and give you a little bit of background. Some of the slides you will see have not been shown. There's a couple of unpublished photographs in there that remain in our archives. And some of them have to do with the conditions on the moon. After 1967, there's a panel of scientists, several of them befriended my father, and gave him direction to where he could apply for more information. And at that time, we had collected information from the Lunar Orbiter series and the Mariner and the Surveyors. And as the Apollo program sprung into life, that information was put into microfiche and microfilm into catalogs as well. And over a period of the next 10 to 12 years, my father dutifully wrote to these departments, ordered their catalogs, of which you'll see some of the frames to give you a general idea. They came in little 2x2 frames that are on catalog pages with their numbers, and you order them, and then you get a 20x16 picture, high glossy Hasselblad, and then you go through them and you can see things such as clouds, you can see activity in the moon, and you can see that the conditions in space, to some degree, depending on the celestial body, mime that of what we have here on this planet. And since George Adamski spoke of these things already in the 1950s, he spoke of the Van Allen radiation belt. He spoke of the firefly effect 10 years before John Glenn reported it. He spoke of the fact that there's 12 celestial bodies, at least, in the solar system. And for many years we argued 9, and the Soviets said we got 10 or at least 12, and now finally we come around to it, we're willing to admit some of these things. So he was a conduit for his space contacts to ease material into the public and also into the space program. He was consulted on several times how to construct satellites and proper shielding, because we had trouble with the solar rays and the radiation that we were unfamiliar with, and he provided answers to that. And there were successful launches because of that. And in fact, there is a gentleman who is in the southwestern United States area, and this particular individual is a retired aerospace engineer, as well as a Department of Defense contractor. He was witness to the 1950 sightings over Korea. He was part of the Marine unit that was there. And when he came back from Korea, he was completely infatuated with the subject because this man witnessed it flying in formation. So he goes to Adamski up in an area called Palomar Gardens on the base of Mount Palomar where the 200-inch Hale Observatory is. And he and his wife and about 40, 50 other witnesses are on the property. And one of these craft flies low level over the trees and touches down in the field next to it. And Alan says he's running across the field, screaming at George, look, 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 look what's landed. And George says, oh, they come by all the time. Tell this man, who has worked for the government, who has witnessed them as close as we stand in this room, that they don't exist. He will laugh in your face. And he has also been responsible for experimentation into electromagnetics, and he is quite a unique individual. And this is just one of the many individuals that associated with George and was part of this very real space experience that we have been fortunate enough to happen all over this planet. So some of this information, as George talked about the moon being a light atmosphere, gravitational field. Let's stop for a second. One, two, three. So as Adamski spoke of gravitational fields, of atmosphere, of water, people laughed. But yet we're not laughing any longer, because we know that water has been spraying out of geysers on the moon. In fact, one of the articles you will see from 1970 is a release from the Apollo program where the instrumentation they left from the previous landing measured water geysers spraying for 14 solid hours. So what my father wanted to do was to collect the information that would also support some of the statements that Adamski made in a more modern time, and then present it to the public as general information so that it may inspire other people to look deeper. And so we realize that we are not just this tiny speck that is fortunately the right distance from the sun, with the right amount of radiation at the right time of the millennium, and everything come together to just fortunately produce what we know today. When we look into the cosmos, creation is much more kind and much more universal to that. So let's take a look at some of these slides. What we did here is in the beginning is to give you some idea of some of the people that reported objects over a period of time. And many of these are old newspaper articles from pilots from Pan Am, from the X-15 series of when we were doing our supersonic testings there at the time of Chuck Yeager and all the individuals before that. And they all witnessed unidentified flying objects. As you can see here, this article deals with the X-15. This is another picture which is also available in color, which is by far much nicer. It shows a cigar-shaped craft over the New Mexico area, and as it moves across the horizon there. This, some of you may have seen, this is a more recent picture. This was taken in Utah in the parks out there by a particular gentleman and his family, and he happened to have his camera, and one of these objects came over the top of the ridge, and he snapped a shot. When you see the hull in this particular configuration, you're looking at it as when the power system is powered down low. Picture it like a rheostat for your lighting system. As it comes closer and closer to the planet, the power system starts to diminish so that it does not interfere with the natural electrical currents that our planet produces, and so you can see more of the craft itself. In reverse order,